Imagine living in a world where food never runs out. You never have to hunt. You never have to fight for water. You never have to worry about predators. It sounds like paradise, doesn't it? But what if I told you that this perfect world slowly turned into a nightmare? Not because of war, not because of disease, not because of hunger, but because life became too easy. This isn't a science fiction story. It actually happened. In the 1960s, an American scientist named John Calhoun wanted to answer a strange question. What happens when every basic need is met? Will society become happier? Or will something unexpected happen? To find out, he built what many people called a rat paradise. The enclosure had clean water flowing all day. Food was always available. The temperature stayed comfortable. There were nesting areas, tunnels, and plenty of places to live. No predators. No bad weather. No competition for survival. Everything was designed to create the perfect home. Then he introduced a small group of healthy rats. At first, everything looked exactly as expected. The rats explored every corner of their new world. They played. They built nests. They raised their babies. They ate whenever they wanted. Life couldn't have been better. The population began to grow. Week after week, more baby rats were born. The scientist watched carefully and wrote down every change. At this point, the experiment looked like a huge success. It seemed to prove that if you remove suffering, life becomes better. But hidden beneath this peaceful picture, something had already started to change. As more rats were born, they began seeing each other more often. Small bumps became common. Personal space slowly disappeared. Nothing serious happened at first, just tiny changes that almost nobody would notice. But sometimes, the biggest disasters don't begin with explosions. They begin with small changes that seem harmless. The population kept growing. Food was still unlimited. Water was still unlimited. Nobody was starving. Nobody was freezing. Nobody was being hunted. Every physical need was still being met. Yet the atmosphere inside the colony felt different. Some rats became nervous. Some started avoiding others. Small fights began breaking out over places to rest. Not because there wasn't enough food, but because there wasn't enough comfortable social space. That surprised Calhoun. He expected competition over resources. The colony kept growing. More rats were born. More nests were built. Every day, the scientist walked in, looked around, and filled another page in his notebook. At first, everything still looked normal. But then, he noticed something strange. Some rats had stopped exploring. Instead of running through tunnels, they stayed in the same small areas for hours. Others became unusually aggressive. They started chasing rats for no clear reason. Sometimes they attacked even when there was plenty of food nearby. This wasn't a fight for survival. It was something else. As the colony became more crowded, social life became more complicated. Strong rats claimed the best nesting spots. Weaker rats were pushed aside. Some stopped fighting back completely. Instead, they hid alone. Others became trapped in endless conflicts. The colony was becoming divided. Then Calhoun noticed another disturbing change. Some mothers stopped caring for their babies. A few abandoned their nests. Some young rats didn't survive because they received little care. The normal patterns that had existed from the beginning slowly started to disappear. But perhaps the strangest group of all became known as the beautiful ones. These rats looked perfectly healthy. Their fur was spotless. They spent hours grooming themselves. They avoided fights. They avoided mating. They avoided raising families. They simply ate, drank, slept, and cleaned themselves over and over again. From the outside, they looked perfect, but they had completely withdrawn from normal social life. They had stopped being part of the community. Calhoun saw this as a sign that something much deeper than overcrowding was happening. The environment still provided everything the rats needed to survive. But survival alone wasn't enough. A healthy society also depends on normal social relationships. As more rats withdrew, others became even more aggressive. The balance that once held the colony together slowly disappeared. The experiment had entered a new phase. Not because food had run out, not because disease had spread, but because normal behavior itself was beginning to break down. This became the idea Calhoun later described as a behavioral sink, a condition where abnormal social behavior spreads through an overcrowded population living in an artificial environment. It's important to remember something. This wasn't nature. These rats couldn't leave. They couldn't create new territories. They couldn't escape the social pressure around them. They lived inside a closed world designed by humans. That detail matters, because the experiment wasn't proving that every crowded society will collapse. It was showing what could happen inside an artificial environment where normal behaviors became disrupted. Even so, what happened next shocked the scientific world. The colony had everything it needed to stay alive, yet somehow, it was slowly destroying itself. And the final stage was even more disturbing. Months passed. The colony was now larger than ever. From a distance, everything still looked perfect. There was food, there was water, there was shelter. But inside, something had changed forever. More and more rats stopped behaving like normal rats. Many avoided all social contact. Some wandered without purpose. Others stayed in the same corner for hours, doing almost nothing. The mothers that once protected their babies now often ignored them. Young rats grew up without learning normal social behavior. And once that cycle was broken, it became harder for the next generation to recover. Calhoun watched as the colony slowly lost the behaviors that had helped it thrive in the beginning. Fewer rats mated. Fewer babies survived. The birth rate dropped. The population eventually stopped growing. Then, it began to shrink. Not because food disappeared, not because of a deadly virus, but because the social system itself was falling apart. This was the most surprising part of the experiment. The bodies of the rats were healthy, but the community was not. Calhoun called this the first death. Not the death of the body, but the death of normal social behavior. He believed that when animals lose the behaviors needed to build families, care for young, and cooperate with others, the future of the population is already in danger. Only later comes the second death, the physical disappearance of the population itself. It was a powerful idea, and it captured people's imagination. Newspapers wrote about it. Books discussed it. Over time, many people began using the experiment as a warning about modern cities. Some even claimed it proved that human civilization would collapse in exactly the same way. But that's not what the experiment proved. Humans are not rats. We build cultures. We invent technology. We create laws. We solve problems together. Our societies are far more complex. Even Calhoun believed that humans could avoid these outcomes by designing better communities and healthier social environments. His work wasn't a prediction. It was a warning, a reminder that survival isn't only about food and safety. People also need purpose, connection, belonging, responsibility. Without those things, even a comfortable life can begin to feel empty. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, because the final question isn't about the rats. It's about us. Look around for a moment. Millions of people live closer together today than at any other time in history. Our cities are bigger. Our buildings are taller. Our phones keep us connected every second. Yet many people say they have never felt more alone. Of course, this doesn't mean we're repeating Calhoun's experiment. Human life is far more complex. But his work asks a question that's still worth thinking about. Can comfort alone create happiness? Or do we need something more? Think about it. The moments that shape our lives rarely come from comfort. They come from learning, from struggling, from building something, from helping someone else, from finding a reason to get up every morning. A life with no challenges may sound perfect, but without purpose, comfort can slowly become emptiness. That may be the biggest lesson from Calhoun's experiment. Not that overcrowding automatically destroys society. Not that humans are doomed. But that healthy communities need more than food and shelter. They need trust. They need meaningful relationships. They need responsibility. They need hope. Every generation has to build those things. They don't appear automatically. John B. Calhoun didn't leave the world with a prophecy. He left us with a question. What kind of environment helps living creatures truly thrive? One that simply keeps them alive, or one that gives them a reason to live? Maybe that's why this experiment is still discussed more than half a century later. Not because it tells us the future, but because it forces us to think about the present. The real cage was never just the walls around the rats. It was the loss of healthy social behavior inside those walls. And maybe every society should ask itself one simple question. Are we only making life easier? Or are we also making it more meaningful? Because surviving is not the same as living. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. A paradise without purpose may not be paradise at all. So the next time someone tells you that happiness comes from having everything, Remember the rats. Remember the scientist. And remember this. A perfect world isn't built by unlimited comfort. It's built by purpose, connection, and people who still care about one another. That's the difference between simply existing and truly living.